Good evening, everyone. My name is Professor Tara Dean, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Provost at London South Bank University. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to the inaugural lecture of Professor Karin Moser. A particular welcome to colleagues from the South London branch of CIPD who have joined us this evening. Hopefully we'll be able to talk to some of you afterwards in the reception just outside. The presentation of an inaugural lecture is a significant milestone in the academic career of a full professor. The inaugural lecture provides an opportunity to present their career so far, to introduce their field of expertise to wider audience, and to update colleagues on current and future plans. For the schools where our professors are based at, the event is a chance to celebrate their achievements across the staff and student body, to strengthen existing relationships and catch up with some alumni and colleagues and external guests, and to establish hopefully new conversation and new collaboration. For the university, inaugural lectures represents an essential component of the public events program. They are really a key opportunity to engage with the general public, creating a wider awareness of the benefits of the university's education and research. As such, we are delighted to be restarting these again in person after the COVID pandemic. And my sincere thanks to colleagues behind the scene who have organized these events. So far, they have run extremely smoothly. Meeting in person feels very special. It does facilitate a greater richness of understanding, a greater flexibility of discussion in the post-event reception, and a greater gravity meeting in this place in this way for such an important milestone. Meeting in person also gives me the chance to rehearse that age-old introduction to any face-to-face meetings. I'm sure we all miss them very much. And here it goes. Please switch off your mobile phones. Keep in mind that we are recording the event, and the toilets are signposted just outside the room, and we are not planning a fire alarm. So if the alarm goes, please make your way in an orderly fashion to the signposted fire exit area. Over there. Okay, I imagine you are all delighted to hear that ritual introduction again. So allow me to introduce Professor Karin Moser to you. Karin is a psychologist specializing in social and organizational psychology and behavior. She obtained her PhD in 1998 from University of Zurich in Switzerland, and actually received an outstanding research award from the university for her doctoral dissertation. She joined LSBU in 2015, and prior to joining us, she had gained extensive experience by working in the sector in UK, in Aston, Roehampton, London Met, as well as in universities in Switzerland, Germany, and US. Karin has secured over £2 million from industry and research councils for her research, and has worked closely with corporate clients. And I handpicked just a few of them, well, a few that I could pronounce, I'm afraid. So amongst them are Bosch, GmbH, the Swiss Post, and the largest Austrian health insurer, which I couldn't pronounce. I'm sure you know who they are. as well as major public sector bodies like NHS and the Met Police. Karin has published widely in her area of research and is recognized internationally as evidenced by esteemed measures such as editorial board membership of Journal of Personnel Psychology, and being the lead judge for the Management Book of the Year since 2012. Outside of being an accomplished academic, Karin has other talents. And I was told that, in fact, before becoming an academic, she enjoyed training and performing modern dance, which is superb. It's really intrigued me, that fact, so I went to her colleagues and tried to find out some more findings about Karin. Well, they were very generous with what they shared with me. They told me that she is brilliant at being at interview panels and in selecting future colleagues. Knowing her field of expertise, that's probably not surprising. They also shared with me her love of Cornwall and St. Ives, and they shared her absolute love for Cadbury chocolate being far superior to that Swiss variation of chocolate. But seriously, what her colleagues shared above everything with me is how generous she has been with her time and how she has taken the school forward in terms of research and enterprise from a very low level of activity when she joined the school. So I really wanted to acknowledge and thank her for her leadership on that front as well. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Moser to deliver her inaugural address.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction and the kind words and the rumors and gossip that you shared. You know how it is. Never believe any gossip that you haven't put out there yourself. I'm very pleased to talk to you tonight. Thank you for joining us, students, colleagues, and also people from outside of the university. I'm going to talk about prosocial behaviour and cooperation to you tonight. Why did I end up, among other things, with such a research topic? What really intrigued me when I, like many things in life, sort of stumbled onto this, shortly after I did my PhD, was that it is something that is totally fundamental to human behavior, is really relevant in all areas of our lives, so our private lives, our professional lives as well, and certainly in the workplace. And how I came to become interested in it was that after doing a PhD that was actually quite cognitively oriented, much more academic with less applications, I actually had the opportunity to join a large research consortium and be a PI on that, which involved several universities. I was at the time at the ETH in Zurich, the Federal Institute of Technology. You might have heard of it. It's a really good research university, to lead on a consortium that looked at the basis of knowledge management. And it involved not only universities, 3 in total partners, but also 15 corporate partners. It was the first time ever that I did something like this. And it really drew me in. I realized at that point that going forward postdoc, I was very interested in engaging in something that had both very basic fundamental aspects of research, but also high transferability, that I enjoyed translating things and putting them into practice. And that this had a high value for me Probably also because I had a previous life in dancing, as you said, so I'm a late academic. I also worked in the private sector previously, and I think that also shaped my views. So that's how I sort of came to this. Yeah, so let's start with a bit of an academic part. So what are we actually talking about? What is prosocial behaviour? As I'm sure you know, academia is not always helpful in those things. It's actually the case that very often authors do not define it. They don't really distinguish it very clearly. And this has been the case for more than 40 years. There's a lot of research going on cooperation, prosocial behaviour. There are sort of three interrelated concepts that are important here. It's helping behaviour, it's altruism, and it's prosocial behaviour. What they all share, what is the common denominator of it, is that it is any behaviour that is aimed at increasing the welfare, the well-being of the receiver of that supportive behaviour. That doesn't mean there isn't any benefits for the person providing the support, providing the help. This doesn't have to be excluding that, so there's often benefits for the self as well. This can be by multiple means, in many different ways. There's very small acts of prosocial behaviour. I don't know, you notice somebody who is elderly and is trying to cross the street or is carrying something heavy, and you offer your help, for instance, carrying something, helping them across the street. That's a very small act of kindness. It can, and it's towards a stranger, so that's an example. There's of course the whole sector of volunteering, also making financial contributions, making donations. There's the whole area of helping friends and family, being supportive in any which way you can, but also for your colleagues and co-workers, which is the area I started focusing on and that I will also talk about tonight. It's usually seen as intentional behaviour, so we do it on purpose, we plan it voluntarily. It's not what we normally would call automatic behaviour in psychology. If you're interested in this, I have a literature reference here. It's a very new one, hot off the press, that actually gives you all the background on the different usage of definitions of those terms if you want to have a look. What motivates it? What makes us being prosocial, cooperative, wanting to help, wanting to support others? Helping is not always unconditional. It can be conditional. You only do it under certain circumstances, or only if you know that there is a high chance of receiving help in return, or something else in return for your support. Very often, altruism is more seen or defined as helping behaviour that is unconditional. Not always, but for a majority of authors this is the case, and sort of the paradigm would be the parent-child relationship, where both ways, depending on the life stage and age, you make investments, you support without really looking to the costs of those behaviours. Prosocial behaviour in turn, and this is why I use it as well, tends to be more associated with conditional helping, which is something that we find very often at work, that people are not completely, unconditionally supportive. If we look to the theories, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but if we look to those, then of course there's evolutionary explanations. It's one of the chief explanations why we think that humans are so successful as a species, because if we are able to cooperate, which involves, perspective taking, anticipation, so a lot of higher order processing, both on the cognitive, the motivational, the emotional levels, we are successful because we can achieve things we could not achieve otherwise. It increases our ability to secure resources, to stay safe, and so forth. There's also a social cognitive learning perspective, that this is about learning what is right. It's about social norms, what is appropriate, what is expected in society, in a specific culture. There's a goal-setting perspective, which is more in the area of the workplace, usually used. So we want to achieve something, I don't know, building a bridge is very difficult for an individual. It usually requires several people. So you need to cooperate. That is something that is important. Another perspective that I use, and I'll explain a bit more about, is the social dilemma perspective, which is based on game theory. So we are pro-social if there is some sort of gain, some sort of benefit in it. Again, something that can be very useful when we try to look at pro-social behaviour at work. One way that you could look at it is in this way. So it's, it's overall, it's helping behaviour, and there's pro-social and altruistic behaviour. And altruistic behaviour, because it's often seen as unconditional, as a tendency, sort of a subcategory. You don't have to, but I think this could be a helpful way of looking at things. What is core is the processes that are involved in also all of these behaviours. Any pro-social behaviour always requires that you engage in some perspective taking, in empathy. You cannot help without actually understanding, at least to a certain degree, what the other person needs, where they are, where they stand. This is also influenced by norms, cultural, social norms. What is appropriate, for instance, reciprocity norms, very important. You can also take very simple examples outside of the workplace. Things like you're invited to dinner from someone. What is an appropriate present gift that you bring? This actually varies in different cultures. Is there an expectation that you actually return the invitation at some point, and so forth? So these are norms that govern our life. What is really important is the last point here. The closer we are to someone, the more pro-social we tend to be, the more natural, the more automatic, the easier it is that it comes to us. What matters here is likability, how much we like someone, but also emotional attachment, which in turn, both of them usually are highly correlated with trusting someone, which is also why it's much more easy, it's much easier for us and feels much more natural to be pro-social, to be supportive, to help others if they're friends and family than if they're further removed. And we have less attachment, like for instance, if this is in the workplace. So let's look a bit more at what can tip sort of what is the tipping point, what are potential costs and what are potential benefits of pro-social behaviour. If we look first at the benefits, there are multiple ones. So it's by no means the case that if we are pro-social, this is only for the receiver. Very often the person providing the help stands to benefit. And those benefits that I'm listing here, they're also not exclusive, so they, quite often it can be multiple benefits. So it can be reputational gains, that you gain a reputation as a team player, for instance, in the workplace, as a benefactor because you give up your time, you volunteer, things like that. It's also that you can gain an entitlement. You put something in the bank, so to speak, to later ask for help or expect help from others. That is something that happens very often in the workplace. It's also known as reciprocal altruism. So we know that people who are actually very competitive as a basis, their attitude towards others, they can be very prosocial in the present with an aim to be able to reap benefits from the prosociality in the future. They can, of course, give you material gains, tax relief if you make donations to charity and so forth. It can also mean that you gain acceptance because you comply with norms, which in turn, this is the next point, can lead to identity gains, a sense of belonging. I'm one of you because I know how to behave. I follow the rules, the expectations, the norms. There can also be self-esteem, emotional gains, because it makes you feel good about yourself. There is a value congruence, and you feel you're a good person, you're doing the right thing, because this represents important values to you. The cost, it always takes some time and effort. It's not always a lot of effort or a lot of time. It does require some effort and motivation to understand others' perspectives and needs. Otherwise, you cannot be an effective helper. It can mean money, material investments. Think about all the people who currently open their homes to Ukrainian refugees, for example. They're making substantial investments of time and effort, but also material investments of providing space, providing a home. And potentially, there is also a risk of exploitation, because maybe you expect something back, at the very least, maybe a thank you, a recognition of some sort. Or, especially in the workplace, there could be the risk that others take credit. They just take what you provide and take credit for your work, efforts, idea, and it's no longer visible as what you provided. So this brings us neatly to what actually is important if we talk about prosocial behaviour at work. Because if you think about what I just said, if we think about cooperation with colleagues, with superiors, with our subordinates, or whatever, peers, people you work with, likability, emotional attachment, closeness is not the given. Yeah. In fact, we all work with people we may not necessarily like. We may not, share interests or political views with. We may respect them for their competence and what they know, but we actually don't feel close to them. What does this mean? I mean, if you're lucky, some of your closest colleagues are also your friends. Yeah, but this is not generally a fact, and it's certainly not something that is the case, across all members of a team or across an entire organization or an entire department and so forth. What does this mean? It means perspective taking takes more effort. It takes extra effort, and we need to look at what actually supports this and enables this. It's also behavior in the workplace that goes beyond just doing the job. Because it requires, engagement, citizenship, thinking ahead, commitment, and interest in others. And this is not always the case. In an ideal workplace, yes, but this is not always the case. From an organizational perspective, psychological perspective, this means that prosocial behavior is so-called extra role behavior. I don't know if you are familiar with this term. It means that it's actually outside of the contractual agreement. It's on top of the normal job. It's acts of support. that make work both more pleasant and more effective generally, but it's not something that you can order. Yeah, it's in the same league as you can't say be spontaneous, you cannot say be prosocial. Yeah, people can do their job, they can fulfill their roles without those small acts of engagement that make the job better, that make it easier, that make it more effective. It is something that is part of the psychological contract. That is a technical term, which is an expectation, a tacit agreement between employers and employees. It's not written down in any work contract, but it's an expectation that you're treated fairly, that you're supported, that you're cooperative, and that you are respected. In many ways, prosocial behavior is the social glue. So if it works, you know it, yeah? Because it feels good. And it's also the case that, in a larger organization, sometimes there are teams within that organization that have an absolutely prosocial, excellent team climate, whereas the organization as a whole does not. That's fully possible. Yeah, there's sometimes islands of prosocial behavior that work because the conditions are right. So this is really the operational word here. Yeah. So prosociality is something in the workplace, not generally, but in the workplace that we cannot influence directly, but indirectly. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is what do we know about the conditions that make prosociality happen. If you're interested in this, I have some literature references here, including the second one, a recent review by Jackie Coyle-Shapiro. So if you're interested in the psychological contract and all it entails, what it is about, then please have a look at that paper, also one of my publications in that area. So, where are the processes, the underlying processes that we can possibly influence that matter to increase prosociality? What I would like to show you is a model I developed, and I only actually realized this when I put this talk together. This model has its 20th anniversary. I published this 20 years ago the first time. And it was actually an outcome of that project when I first got interested in the topic. So that I talked about, where I was a PI. It looks at cooperation in relation to sharing knowledge and information, but it's a model that also maps the more general processes of how can we support cooperation and what happens. And so I want to walk you through briefly, because this is sort of a map for other things. So we are interested in cooperative behavior, and one important distinction here is between attitude and behavior. I'm ultimately always interested in behavior. Attitude is something we often measure and look at as well, but it doesn't necessarily predict behavior. In fact, it often is actually quite separate, because think about it. I mean, if you were to do a survey in an organization, who's going to say they are against helping others? Yeah, it's highly unlikely. Yeah, it's not very PC. It's not socially desirable that you say this. Whether you actually do it is something very different. Yeah, so it's not unlike environmental behavior. Who is against protecting the environment? Whether you actually change your behavior to support this is something else entirely. So it's interesting to look at it, and maybe not surprisingly, do you know what it correlates with? Attitude towards cooperation in organizations. Do you have any thoughts and ideas? Anyone venturing? I know it's always risky asking a plenary like this, because you have to expose yourself.
Correlation between attitude and behaviour?
No, what it correlates with the attitude, not the behavior. That's an interesting one. I'm not aware of that, but I think that's yeah. I mean, the question would also be what kind of performance measures, but what I found consistently in a lot of research we did, it correlates with position in the organization. Yeah, because the higher up you are in the hierarchy, yeah, the more responsibility you have for what happens. So how can you say no? So sort of the ones, you know, in the lower levels of hierarchy, they are less positive about it, whereas the higher up you go, the more positive it is. This doesn't mean it actually predicts behavior, what they do. Performance one is an interesting one, yeah, absolutely. So what determines this? So on the one hand, we have the people, so the individuals, what they do bring in. And what I've listed here in this little box are things that we know they predict or are important, they influence cooperation behavior. So self-efficacy matters, whether I'm convinced that I can be successful even if conditions are difficult, how ambitious I am, achievement motivation matters, also the degree to which I identify with the organization I work in matters. Because clearly if I'm more highly identified, if I'm proud of where I work, I'm willing to invest more. Of course, competence, as in expertise, also matters. Yeah, any ideas who are the best cooperators in terms of achievement motivation? What is your instinct? What do you think? Extroverts. Okay, all right. That's actually a personality dimension, a different dimension. You know, achievement motivation is essentially how ambitious you are. And a lot of people often think, you know, the more ambitious, the more cooperative you're likely to be. Yes, but the high achievers, they're only cooperative conditionally. Yeah. So if there's something that they want, they will give everything. But as soon as they have it or it's no longer achievable, they're no longer interested. The ones who have low achievement motivation, they just want to have an easy life and do their job and not lose the job, but they're not really ambitious enough to make big investments. So if you need to do this on the level of personnel selection, choose people, actually the ones with a moderate achievement motivation are the best and the most sustainable collaborators that you can choose. This is also sort of the HR side of cooperation, because we can't really influence achievement motivation. That's, you know, it's within the individual. But we can influence, of course, who we employ or who we put in a certain position. So it's very much on the personnel selection, the personnel OD development side of things. The other bit that comes in is, of course, the organization. Technology matters to a large degree. And this, I mean, in a very broad sense. So it's all the means you provide in your organization, from, you know, whether it's Zoom software to meeting rooms to lecture rooms like this and so forth. It's resources in the sense of time and money, because cooperation doesn't come free. If you want, you know, employees to help others, to introduce new employees, for instance, support them, people who are novices, have little expertise or similar things, you also need to give them the time to do this, which is often money, equals to money, plus maybe, you know, provide additional support that also incurs costs. The organizational structure matters. How steep are the hierarchies? Do you actually have the right people in the right organizational unit? Because they will, you know, be forced to collaborate more closely. And this sounds trivial, but my experience is it's absolutely not. And then also, do you have institutionalized rewards for cooperation, cooperative behavior, or not? What is core is that the way those things actually happen is in a smaller subunit. I've called it group here. It could be a team, it could be a department. If the organization is small, it could also be an entire organization. The way we experience others, the way we actually interact with others is in smaller subunits. Yeah? And within those, what matters is the perceived reciprocity. So do we think there is a high chance that we also get help if we are supportive of others, for instance? We also know that autonomy, how much can I shape my own work, space, how I do it, how I prioritize it, is important. This is because we need people, for cooperation who are engaged, so they think ahead, so they actually take some responsibility, which is why in turn allowing for autonomy helps this. Collective efficacy, which is the conviction or the belief that we can be successful when we work together, is really important. Depends very much on whether I believe that the others I'm, for instance, teamed up with are actually competent. Yeah. If I don't think they are competent, I'm not going to cooperate. Why should I? Or I'll try to minimize it because, where's the sense in this? This all is highly connected with trust. And it's also highly dependent on communication, transparency, how clear are the goals, how much is clear why, who does what is rewarded, what is expected, and so forth. So this is the one of the general backgrounds, and this also gives us sort of the template to understand where can we influence, things to enhance cooperation. So I would like now to move on to empirical evidence and talk about some of the research that I've been doing in this area. What do we know? What really makes cooperation work? And there's a number of different factors. So on the one hand, we have individual factors, things like social value orientation. This is the degree or the extent to which individuals have a more pro-social or a more pro-self. Pro-self is more competitive attitudes towards others and the world in general. We all have sort of a baseline how we approach others and how we approach social interactions. We adapt in the actual situation, and I'll show you also how this happens. Collective efficacy we just talked about, but then there are also a lot of aspects that I would place more at the team or the group level. Social norms, they are of course also they go across levels, so you can also find them at the organisational and the wider societal level. Things like professional status, not just position in the hierarchy, but reputation. What am I known for? Matter and influence, pro-social behaviour, perspective taking, which is also something that can be trained. Mental models, how much of the mental models are shared? Is there common ground? Do I know what I'm here for and what my colleagues are here for, what their expertise is, what they're doing, what the joint goal is? Sounds trivial, but it matters a lot, because if I don't know this, how can I actually be supportive? So it comes into this as well. Organisational culture in the wider sense, so this culture of reciprocity where the norms, the reciprocity norms are high, and acts of support, small acts of kindness, bigger acts of help are actually the norm. Matters. Then rewards and recognition. Rewards tends to be the word for institutionalized rewarding mechanisms. Recognition would be more informal recognition, the type of well done recognition that you might get. But then we also have technology. So technology itself impacts actually. Namely things like, do we interact with each other, cooperate with each other face to face, or is it virtually, and so on. But we also found that there is situational effects, which may be a bit surprising. The duration, the length of time that we cooperate with someone actually matters as well. It influences the cooperation, and then there are is the bigger picture. So the environment, the societal, cultural, socio-economic factors. I've done research in all those areas, and I would like to take you through some of those and give you some examples. I've also tried to put together some citations if you're interested in following up. Before we do this and look at actual studies, I just think because I'll summarize some of the key points. So, if we look at prosociality at work, one core point is it's not the given. It requires extra effort because we are not emotionally necessarily or usually very close, very attached to the people we're working with. So it needs extra effort on all sides, organisationally, from the individuals in the workplace, from people with leadership responsibility. Motivation is what counts, what is core. Perception matters, because in this case also the old adage in psychology holds true that if people believe something, they will act accordingly, even if it's factually maybe wrong. So if they believe that someone is not capable, a colleague, of doing something, they will behave accordingly. Norms matter, and what is observed. Actions matter more than what is said and declared. It's a bit like with kids, yeah. They always call you out on those things because they follow what they see you do, no matter what you say. And it's no different with adults, although it's maybe a bit less obvious. Uncertainty matters. So if I'm unsure how others might behave, if there is low transparency in an organisation, and then this can make people hold back. And there can be a social dilemma because there's a collective interest, so the interest of the business, the interest of the organisation, but there's always, of course, the interest of the individual as well, and they're not necessarily aligned. Yeah. So generally speaking, it's in the interest of the collective that people cooperate. But this may actually not be what is good for you, because it may be too much effort, there may be too little reward in it, it may not be in your interest because it doesn't let you do what you like doing most of the work, and so forth. The theoretical approaches that I myself use in my research, I'm not going to go into them in detail, but just the overview, it's social exchange theory approaches, SIT, social identity. I use social dilemmas, and I find it very useful often to conceptualize prosocial behaviour at work in terms of a probabilistic common goods dilemma, probabilistic because there's a high uncertainty involved. But what is actually exchanged, what is the good worth. The common good is cooperation, is sharing, is mutual support. I also often use information processing theories, that's more on the cognitive side, and actually more recently I found myself sort of circling back to self-determination theory for those who are interested in this. So I would like to tell you a bit about my experimental research in these areas. I do a lot of experiments because I like the rigor and because it allows you to have more control over the processes you investigate and to make some causal inferences about the processes. And just to give you an idea, I try to simulate work environments as closely as possible. So this can be this paradigm of a travel agency. Whoops, what's that? Okay, I didn't know it would disappear if I just press a bit longer. All right. Where people interact on a virtual platform, very much like they would in real teams. I also sometimes, and I often use professionals for those studies, I also sometimes work with students and then tend to use, typical tasks that student working groups do, like, doing shared presentations, doing shared group work that they have to submit, and so forth, to also have higher validity, higher realistic environments for them to interact on. Most of those, I used to do them in the lab in person, but most of those these days I do online, which is also nice because it's how we work. So it actually comes quite close to the actual work environment. So I would first like to show you some of the research on rewards, and especially recognition and verbal recognition. These are actually quite simple experiments where we put people into the situation of cooperating on a certain task. And it's always possible, so there's always low task interdependence because that's important. So it's always possible to go the lonely wolf route and just work on their own if they decide to, but also to collaborate with others, be prosocial and support them, and then we expose them to different conditions. In this case, we expose them either to a verbal recognition condition, so somebody, a fake participant was being prosocial and supportive, showing competence and bringing in higher expertise to make the group's life easier and contribute to the task. And in the recognition condition, this was recognized by the others by saying, thank you, well done, this is really helpful. In the other condition, the other group members just took what they got without anything. So there was not no negative feedback, but no recognition that somebody contributed. And what we found here is that this may not look like it, but it actually is a significant difference. So you can see the information sharing is called respect here increases, also the attitude in this case. And it's just, essentially a simple thank you and well done. What we also found is that this is not independent of social norms. Yeah. So people are very sensitive and susceptible to how reciprocal their environment is. And we found a big variance in perceived reciprocity. So how high is the likelihood that if I help, someone else helps me as well? And what you can see here is that we actually have an interaction effect. Yeah. So if the perceived reciprocity of the work environment is high, then those little verbal recognition, they're not wrong, but they don't really make much of a difference, because if the norm is established, people follow the norm. Yeah. But if reciprocity is low or moderate, this actually made a big difference. What does this tell us? It also shows us how in a work environment that is not very reciprocal, not very prosocial as such, you may actually be able to influence this by recognizing people who are prosocial and starting to turn the tide a bit. Yeah. We also did some research into financial rewards. What happens if we pay people for prosocial behavior? So same setup, slightly different conditions. So here this actually compares conditions where we had no pay reward for the team or for individual members of the team. And as you can see, cooperation goes massively down as soon as people are paid, which may be a bit counterintuitive, yeah? Although, I don't know about you, but I've heard of this lots of times, especially if it's about intangible assets. So the cooperation is about sharing expertise, it's about sharing information, it's about sharing knowledge, that the willingness to help, to support, to invest actually decreases if you start paying people. What I think happens here is this is directly connected to cooperation, prosocial behavior being extra role behavior, and as soon as you start paying, this actually in the perception comes into something that is part of the contractual agreement that you have. And then people sort of become very calculating. What is my knowledge worth? What is my expertise worth in money? And I think the short answer is it's never enough. Yeah. And so people actually bring things down. So this may actually have very adverse effects on the willingness to cooperate with others. Yeah, this brings me to the question, who do we actually reward? Yeah, is it the team or is it the individual? So we also looked at this in some other studies and found that yes, team rewards actually, not surprisingly maybe, but still important to note, they work, they help to support prosociality at work, of course only under the condition that task interdependence is low, because if there's high task interdependence, if you put people together in a team where, you know, team member B can only do something if team member A has first done step number one, you create cooperation, you enforce it. So, so in that case, you know, this doesn't really mean anything. What is interesting is that if we had team rewards rather than individual rewards, we also had an increase in behaviors like that actually related to quality control. So response to poor quality, we had less withdrawal, yeah. So if some team members, there were different scenarios, didn't engage so much, the other team members were actually more willing to still engage, stay prosocial, and so forth. All behaviors that are in the interest of the workplace or in the interest of the organization. Yeah. Another problem that we very often have at work, and that is well known as a very tricky one, is the case of knowledge asymmetry. Yeah, so you have people of different expertise, people who are new, just joining the workforce or new on the job. It's important, obviously, when people retire for transitions, you don't want to lose the knowledge, the know-how that you have in the company, and so forth. And how do you actually motivate people who have high expertise, because they also have high expert power, to share their knowledge? This model here that you can see looked at expertise not only as, you know, somebody who has superior knowledge compared to others, but the hypothesis was that what also matters for the motivation to share knowledge is very much the status as expert within the organization, or the status as novice within the organization. And the way I tested this here was by doing something that is very classical in the workplace. It's giving supervisor feedback, different types of feedback about the performance of the team members, and giving no feedback, individual feedback, giving group feedback, so the individual contribution was no longer visible, or making the feedback public to the other members of the organization. So this involved quite a few of the things. So this is about rewards, but social value orientation we also looked at. Does this matter individual preferences for pro-self, for pro-sociality, status, of course, but as a control variable, we also looked at norms. What happened? Oh yeah, and perspective taking, of course, comes also into it. If, I know I'm working together with people who are much less experienced than I, and have less expertise, how am I going to behave in this situation? Am I willing to support them, to train them, to share, become experts as well, or not? What happens in those cases? Yeah, so here you can see the different conditions. No feedback. And the dark ones are the experts, the light ones are the non-experts or the novices in the area. And you can see the experts, they should be outperforming. They had a real expert advantage, knowledge advantage over the others. They should be outperforming the others, but they're holding back, as well. So they're both too low. As soon as there is individual feedback, the expert contributions go up. So this was behavior. Why? What's the explanation? Their status is confirmed, because it's actually, that they made a bigger contribution than others. And you can see exactly the reverse in the group feedback condition. So they go back, they hold back, they don't perform as well as they could, they don't contribute and share, whereas the novices make an extra effort, they actually increase their contributions. I think this has to do with evaluation apprehension, because if you're a novice, if you know you have less knowledge, you expose yourself. If the feedback is individual, this is not necessarily comfortable, but if you're a member of a team, you can actually increase your self-esteem because you're a member of the successful team. Contributions of experts are even higher if they can also gain reputation because the feedback is public. What I can also show you is that this is not independent of individual factors, so the so-called social value orientation. We have a ceiling effect if people as a baseline are already high in their pro-social orientation. It makes a big difference for the people who are pro-self oriented. That's the competitive people, the ambitious people. And what is more, we also find an interaction with reciprocity. So again, it's not independent of the environment. There is an interaction with social norms. So if reciprocity is high, we have a ceiling effect. But again, we find that when there is low reciprocity, acknowledging status, acknowledging contributions can actually increase prosociality considerably. Yeah. The next factor I wanted to show you is the impact of time. So this was a simple manipulation also in an experiment of lengths of collaboration time. So we put participants into conditions of working together just for 2 weeks, and then they knew they wouldn't ever see the others again. So that was the short-term condition. And others were told, you do this project together for 2 weeks, but actually there will be follow-up projects and you will be teamed up with the same people for an entire year. And so this was just the anticipation of how long they would work together. And maybe a bit counterintuitively, what you can see here is that people are more cooperative in the short term. Why? What happened here is that in the short-term condition, there is a task focus. There is more willingness to help somebody, also if somebody else is less experienced, if somebody else is defecting, is not as pro-social, is not investing as much into teamwork. Why? We think it's protecting yourself from exploitation and still getting the job done. Whereas in the long-term condition, if you cooperate, if you help and support, you're in for a long-term work relationship where you're always the person who invests more. And people reacted by insisting more on equality norms, yeah? So norm setting, they showed lower cooperation overall, but also more conditional defection, yeah? So saying, okay, I will only be willing to collaborate with you in this teamwork if you also deliver, and you also deliver at a good quality. So just the length of collaboration time can actually tip the costs and benefits of cooperation. Yeah, it's a situational factor. Last one of the studies I wanted to show you here is the bigger, wider cultural, societal impact. This is a study we did in 31 countries where we looked at social mindfulness as one measure of prosociality and found really big differences between countries. I don't know if you can see it here. This is just the overall measures of social value orientation, and here social mindfulness. The UK sits here on 12th position, so slightly above the average that we found in those 31 countries. What is interesting is that there were clear relationships between the degree of prosociality. It was the same type of participants we had in all countries, with things like the degree of hierarchical structures, so less hierarchical structures, higher economic prosperity, higher adherence to the rule of law, lower reported religiousness, and also higher environmental protection were associated with higher degrees of social mindfulness. So similar, but at a much higher level. We cannot really fully explain the causality, but there seems to be a connection with cultural and environmental factors as well. So that's all the nice experiments that show you, what matters and what influences prosociality. But you might have been wondering whether I sometimes also venture out into the real world, so-called. It's quite real, the experiments as well, and actually, do a reality check and work with organizations as well. Actually, I do occasionally, and I wanted to also show you, although we cannot have the same rigor and the same methodology, that we find very interesting results if we do field studies, but also workplace interventions. So these are a few examples of research that I have done. There's many more over the years with organizations. One study we did was with NHS teams. And we had, at the time of the research, we had actually representative teams for the UK. Two types, oncology teams and community mental health teams, very different teams, but both teams that are highly challenging in the sense that they are cross-functional, they're usually big, they have changing memberships, they have high interdisciplinarity. And we were interested whether actually higher prosocial behavior, higher helping behavior, higher information sharing contributed to the performance, especially with respect to innovation at team level. Innovation at team level is an important measure because it means that teams are more adaptive, more resilient to find solutions to problems, new solutions if they're under pressure. And as you can see here, we actually did find this. The analysis you can see here is a multi-level analysis. So we analyzed it at team level, and innovation was actually externally rated by medical experts to avoid common method bias for those who are interested in this. And what we could find is if the level of helping behavior as a daily work behavior was higher, then also interdisciplinary teams, with high occupational diversity, but also very large teams, which are unfavorable team conditions, were innovative, actually even outperforming other teams. So it seems that if we have that daily support of helping, of information sharing, that acts as a buffer against other constraints and can actually support higher performance outputs. So that's one example. Then I also did a lot of work on looking at monitoring, the model I showed you at the start of what influences cooperation with a lot of different types of organizations across different sectors. And one thing I wanted to show you here is consistent differences we found in what predicts higher helping behavior, cooperation, prosocial behavior in the workplace if we compare R&D development teams, in industry, in the production sector, with service sector, and we also found those differences in big multinational firms within companies. So departments that are mainly have a service function versus departments that mainly have an R&D function, and as you can see, it's quite different. So for the production and R&D sector, autonomy, achievement motivation, collective efficacy are very important. Whereas if it's service sector, it's much more about job security, the technology that you use, the availability and accessibility, reliability of co-workers, but also the identification with the employer and the organization. What does this mean? It also means that the different parts that we can influence to support prosocial behavior, they're not task independent. They depend on whether the task, the job we do requires new problems, so, solutions to new problems, innovation, or whether it's more routine, as it is often the case in the service sector. This is about perspective taking, actually unblocking barriers with top management teams. So I have done a lot of work in this area and a lot of training in this explicating perspectives. You can also train perspective taking in this way. It's by using metaphors, communicating perspectives, explicating them, looking for alternative models to create common ground. What I'm showing you here is a model that was actually created by members of a top management team, so CEOs that I worked with, and they came to this model by looking at the language they used when they were describing their knowledge management strategy. And as you can see, it was quite drastic. They had a very aggressive language that sort of only came to light when they looked at it, analyzed it, and were actually asked to draw it as a model. There was an impasse with what they felt the employees were doing, hiding, building up a defense line, and the strategy was actually to try to tear down the walls with even bigger threats and cannons and so forth. Others, also a real example, came more up with models like this. What is happening? What are we trying to achieve? We're trying to have a strategy of which knowledge is really important, how we share it across the organization and so forth. So much less adversarial than the other model, but also not without problems. What those kind of explications do is they make clear what tacit assumptions someone has. Helps to put them out there. and makes them accessible, helps to look at alternatives, form different models, play with them. Other models that people use are, a ship that sails across the sea, and who's actually the captain? Do we actually have somebody who knows how to sail? Where are we going? Which way is the wind blowing? And so forth. It also helps to distance yourself. So it's a technique that can unblock communication. It's actually based on a methodology that I developed based on my PhD research that was also developed then further to use in medical. In the medical field, I had a lot of projects about this with people in transplantation medicine, where it was used to assess body image and donor organ integration. So this is a very different level. Another example is the work I did with the EU plus countries, 30 countries, which actually then was also turned into an impact case submitted here at LSBU for the ref. That was about improving. I was mandated by the European Commission for 3.5 years to support the countries with improving their information sharing and decision making. They approached me because they knew that I was working in this area, so it wasn't with the aim for this to become a ref case, but that was what happened. This is not published. I may do this at the later point. This is just a quote from the case. It actually involved many of the methods that I developed as part of my research. And it was all about reducing conflicts, supporting more equal contributions of the different stakeholders, enable new ways of communicating, and it had quite a profound impact on the different stakeholders. It was also challenging and very interesting to work at this level, country level, with stakeholders. Yeah. The last one I wanted to show you out of the real world is something that received quite a bit of attention during the pandemic. It was some research that we did on the impact of technology on cooperation, and in the media it was very much picked up as Zoom fatigue. Is Zoom fatigue a thing? Yes, it is. Very different methodology we used here was daily diary studies we did, employees in the UK. 2 studies now, the first one in the first full lockdown, when all the employees were remote. We have now followed up with a second study, which was when there was already a partial return to work. The question, or the answer that I can give to the question is yes. There is such a thing as Zoom fatigue. So if you experienced it yourself, there is actually an effect of the technology. It has nothing to do with your motivation or with, individual attitude towards technology or something. We found consistently that there is an increase in cognitive depletion. There is an increase in need for recovery. If you have a higher degree of use of video conferences opposed to text-based communication and also face-to-face communication, also to phone calls. It has to do with a reduced ability of reading facial expressions, nonverbal signals, which can lead to cognitive overload because we are wired in a way that we always want to read those signals. So our system fires, if you will, but we are not really able to do this. In addition, most, as you know, most software also shows yourself on camera, so you actually always look at yourself. It's a very unnatural situation that we would never have in a face-to-face interaction. A lot of people find this stressful, but it also increases a process that we know that is called self-monitoring, that also adds to that cognitive depletion. We also had further outcomes that were health-related for those of you who are interested in this. So if there was an increase in using more video conferencing technology, in alcohol consumption, but also in less sports activities, physical activities, and so forth. So, yeah, what else do I do? Further research, and what are future plans? Because this is all stuff that is in the past. I have also done and do a lot of research that actually connects cooperation with performance, decision-making, and well-being. If you remember the model that I showed you, this is just sort of the short summary version. Then, of course, an important question is how, if we have increased cooperation or prosocial behavior, does this connect to performance? I've showed you a little bit about this with the team innovation study with the NHS, but there is more, and also, of course, is there a feedback? Does this influence then individual as well as organizational conditions, the group moderating processes? So things that are currently happening, and some of this is also happening with some of my PhD students, is that I'm interested in the impact of multiculturalism, globalization at the micro level, if you will. So people who have a multicultural identity, how does this impact on their work behavior, performance, cooperation, impact of technology, but also venturing into different areas of open innovation networks and so forth. I have done a lot of research in workplace interventions, so training to improve decision-making quality, to improve decision-making of novices, but also things like coaching interventions in the workplace. How do they impact on prosocial behavior and consequently on performance, on well-being, and so forth. Trust, which I haven't talked about. I have an ongoing project for a number of years now with the University of Cambridge in these areas. And also currently running some studies on social inequalities. So this again extends to that more macro level of societal influences. So if you are in a workplace and in a society where social inequalities are higher in terms of income inequality, for instance, and where you stand within that hierarchy of inequalities, does this have an impact on how you behave towards others? Are you more helpful? Are you more prosocial or less? These are just some of the ongoing things in these areas. There is more that I'm working on. I also do more work on the well done versus well paid issue. So what's the differential effect of so that's an ongoing project of things like intangible rewards, verbal recognition versus if I pay someone, and how does this impact on motivation? Yeah, I'm coming to the close. I think I'm slightly over an hour now because we started late. So the take-home message for today, what are the things that I hope you remember after today? I hope I could show you that what results and what comes out in the workplace as prosocial behavior always has multiple influences. It's never just the person, it's never just the organization, it's very much an interaction of different factors that determine the behavior. It's extra role behavior, so it requires extra effort, more so than in the private sphere. Motivation, perception matter. What is actually done, what is observed in terms of norm setting matters, whether the uncertainty is high or not matters, and how much interests are aligned or not. What I would like you to remember about what makes cooperation work, what you can do. Yeah, there's the thing about recognition that we saw. Yeah, that's never wrong. What I wouldn't advocate or wouldn't want to say is this is not about touchy-feeling or just being nice, but it has a small impact. It won't, make a huge difference, but it can help making things slowly contribute, towards a more pro-social workplace. For the norm setting, the most important thing is do what you preach. You set yourself up for failure if there is a discrepancy here. Also, at what level do you want people to cooperate? Is it on tasks or is it on relationships? Both is important, but often one is more important than the other. Don't forget the situational influences. For instance, the length of collaboration already matters. Common ground, actually understanding what it's about, is an indirect but hugely important influence on pro-social behaviour. Do I actually know why I'm here, what I'm supposed to contribute, what others contribute, what they can contribute? And you may need to re-establish this again. This includes explicating tasks, goals, but also different interests. So the rule is always work with the social dilemma, but not against it, because you can't make it go away. Yeah, so that's me about to log off. Yeah, and thank you very much for your attention. And
so I'm very aware that it is just me standing between you and the refreshments that we have outside for you and your opportunity to actually talk to Karin. First of all, I'd like to thank Karin so much for this lecture this evening. I think it was fascinating, and I certainly have learned a lot that I can take into my own practice and also reflect on how I work going forward. So thank you. So can we have a round of applause one more time, please? Congratulations on your promotion, Karin. It is really well deserved, and this lecture has been a long time coming. I can remember finding out about your promotion, I think, when Mike was still dean. So it's been quite a long time coming, I think.
It's not been recent.
And it's a really great opportunity to celebrate everything that's good about the business school. As a dean of the business school, I have a lot of management staff who love to comment on my leadership style, so I'm always slightly paranoid. Every week I get 2 or 3 little emails from my colleagues saying, "Well done, Sarah, that was good. Did you know you were using this model of practice? Did you know you were doing this? Did you know you were doing that?" And I didn't. When Karin sends me an email that says "well done," it goes right to my heart, because I know this lady knows what she's talking about, and I take that on board, and I really appreciate the comments and support that Karin has given me as a dean over the last few years. We have grown up in this institution over 7 years, and I've known Karin for all of that time, working alongside her, and now as her dean, and it's an absolute pleasure to work with Karin and learn from her. She's taught me a lot. The main thing she's taught me is how to interview, and how to really scrutinise people that come across our desk, and we have 1 hour with, to find out as much as we can about them and know whether they're going to fit into our institution. Karin, I don't know if you realise, but over the years we've recruited over 51 people to the business school as a team, and I think we're a pretty good team at doing that now. And what Karin has done and supported us as a school with doing is really developing our research culture, setting up our research community, setting up our research centre, and then working with me, the previous dean, and all of our HODs to really recruit the best into our school. And what you see now is a school with 42 ECRs, a great prof. Ria's just been promoted as well, and Aidan's just been promoted to AP. So we've been developing people as well, and that pipeline is really important to the strength of the school and to the university and to our students, which obviously are the most important thing about our school. So thank you, Karin, not just for everything you've done here that you've presented tonight, but everything you've done for the school over the last 7 years. It is an absolute pleasure working with you, and I look forward to continuing to develop the school with you going forward. a great person to have on my team. Karin. Now, one thing I will say in those 51 recruitment people that we've actually recruited is that we've probably interviewed about 200, 300, 400 people over the years. Most of that locked in an office together with several of our colleagues for hours and hours and hours in the heat, in the cold, drinking tea, drinking water, drinking Coke. But one thing that has kept us together is our love of chocolate. However, Karin, we do disagree. I am British through and through. You cut me in half and the word Cadbury runs straight through me. Karin, we choose to disagree. She is Swiss, therefore the Lindt and the Lindor and even the finer quality Swiss chocolate comes out. However, my mission is not just to continue to work with Karin, but to actually improve her taste. So as a little celebration from me to you, a little personal one, Karin, I've got a box of Cadbury's Heroes for you. Just finally, we've got this to give to you, just so that you will always remember this evening. And everything that you've contributed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karin. So we're going to wrap up now. Thank you, Neil and team, for tonight, organising everything. It's been brilliant. Thank you to Tara for her opening remarks. Well done once again, Karin.